Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that has featured on the channel many times before. So these guys were one of the first Swedish craft breweries that I encountered when I moved over here back in 2015. And back then this brewery was really known for their big imperial stouts and also their fruity sours. But in more recent years, they've expanded their portfolio and been trying a lot of different styles and doing it very solidly, in my opinion, as well. Now, the beer that we're going to have a look at today is a style that I know these guys can do very, very well. It's a beer that's been quite highly regarded, actually, and it's also one of their latest releases through Systembolaget here in Sweden. So I'm quite curious to see what this is going to have in store for us. So hopefully it's another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always, I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head up towards Gothenburg once again, Göteborg, as you would say in Swedish, the Swedish craft beer capital up there on the west coast. Got to get that Gothenburg catchphrase in when we're reviewing Gothenburg beers because it is just channel tradition these days. We're going to go out to the east of the city a little bit to Landvetter, just by the airport, and that means that we're going to have a look at another beer from the wonderful Bryggeri. So this particular beer is called Elite. It comes in at 8% ABV, and this is a New England Hazy Imperial Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA. So this beer was released as part of the Lokalt Osmoskaligt assortment through Systembolaget in Sweden for September of 2022, and it was also released alongside the West Coast IPA, which you saw me review a few videos ago, Pinball, if I remember the name correctly, and that one was very, very nicely done. But of course, Dugas have had the Fresh and the Crush series in recent years, which have produced some really nice and solid New England IPAs. So I'm curious to see what this is going to have in store for us because, like I say, this beer is supposed to be a pretty good one from what I've heard. So let's crack on and see what we have in store for us. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Dugas Brewery before, and we will no doubt add more to that list in the near future. There's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is massively appreciated, and you can of course check out the playlist of beers from different countries. This one can be found in the Swedish playlist, and the whole channel's tagging system is based on geography. So go and search for your local city, region, whatever, and you should have a few things that pop up there. But do go and check out some other videos as well. But let's crack on with this and have a look at Dugas Bryggeri. So on to my brewery notes then to tell you a little bit about this brewery's history. So, as I've mentioned to you already, Dugas Bryggeri are based in Landvetter, which is on the kind of eastern outskirts of Gothenburg, Göteborg, on the Swedish west coast. And the brewery was actually established back in 2005 in Mölndal to the south of the city by Mikael Engström Duga, from whom of course it takes its name. So a few years prior to this, Mikael had actually met an Englishman who was selling second-hand breweries, and this really got him thinking about brewing his own beer. So he studied the very complex Swedish alcohol laws, he visited other breweries around the country to see what they were doing, and then he started buying up his own equipment to put together his own brewery. And this process culminated with the opening of the first Dugas brewery in Mölndal to the south of Gothenburg back in 2005. Over the following years, they continued to experiment and brew new beers and get their name out there a little bit more. And by 2009, they'd actually outgrown their original brewery. And so they decided that they were going to move, and they moved up to Landvetter the following year in 2010. So the older brewery had a capacity of 1,500 hectolitres per year at maximum, so about 150,000 litres. But the new brewery started off with a capacity of 8,000 hectolitres of beer per year. So that's in the region of 800,000 litres. And apparently this capacity has more than doubled in recent years. I really have no idea how much Dugas Bryggeri are actually producing per year these days, and it's quite hard to find that figure. So maybe we need to do a Meet the Brewery with Mikael Engström Duga and see what he says. But over the years, this brewery, of course, became well known for their different fruit and sour beers, but also for their big imperial stouts. That was what they were known for back in the day. There was a period of time where I believe Dugas Bryggeri was called, I think, the Dugas Ale and Porter Bryggeri, or Ulo Porter Bryggeri. I can't remember the exact name, but they were known for their kind of fruity sour beers and their big imperial stouts. But in more recent times, they started expanding their portfolio, and they started a whole they started many different series of beers. So there was the Crush series and the Fresh series of New England IPAs. They also had a series of wheat beers, and the name of those eludes me. They had the Bite series, which were West Coast IPAs. They had the Future series, which is the barrel aged imperial stouts, and they also have the Mega series, which are the high strength imperial stouts as well. Some of those series are still in operation, but some of them aren't. I'm not really sure what exactly is going on with those at the moment. But yeah, basically, in more recent times, they stopped focusing on sour beers and imperial stouts, and also started brewing IPAs, and that was within the last kind of 3-4 years, maybe actually. But the other thing to point out about Dugas Bryggeri is that these guys are one of the co-owners of the two Brewers beer bars in Gothenburg, along with All In Brewing, who are one of the numerous gypsy breweries operating in the Gothenburg area, but also with Electric Nurse, who are run by Mikael's daughter Ida and her husband John, and that is both of those breweries are ones that you should check out actually. But yeah, there are two Brewers beer bars in Gothenburg, and the original one is on Tredje Långgatan, and I filmed an out and about video in there, so I would recommend that you go and check that out actually. And if you find yourself in Gothenburg, there are many good beer destinations, of course. But like I said to you, for me, Dugas Bryggeri are one of the most solid kind of all-round craft breweries here in Sweden. I always like trying their new beers, and yeah, you will see these guys reviewed regularly on the channel actually. Got a lot of time for the Dugas Bryggeri beers, so hopefully we can get these guys on the channel for a Meet the Brewery at some point soon. But that's all I can really tell you about Dugas Bryggeri for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on their social media, you can check out the Untappd page to learn about all their different beers, of course, or you can watch some of my older videos. And do check out the out and about video that I did at Tredje Långgatan Brewers Beer Bar, because that was a pretty nice experience. But yeah, let's crack on with this one then and see how we go. So, yes, that's everything about your history of Dugas Bryggeri. But once again, you can see the artwork on this one is pretty nice. I will point out that this is a half-litre can, which is kind of unusual for Sweden actually, but Dugas, yeah, they do seem to be doing half litres instead of 440s. We're not going to complain because we get a little bit more beer. But yeah, there you can see the Dugas D on the top of the can, Dugas Elite underneath, and then yeah, it's interesting. If it was me, I have to admit I would put Dugas on the top of the can and then just have Elite in the middle. So it's kind of interesting. I've noticed that with the beers, they're calling them Dugas Elite instead of just putting Dugas on the top of the can. So yeah. But another one of the Dugas Bryggeri symbols is this one here on the back. But I do think putting the Dugas D on the stouts, I think the stouts are going to continue in the bottles. So yeah, putting the Dugas D on some of the bottle caps for the stouts would be quite interesting. But yeah, like we said earlier, this one is an 8% New England hazy imperial double, whatever you want to call it, IPA, and it tells you a little bit about the beer on the side here. So it says, here's to hops, because that is why we do it. All those sweet and green fruits, that berry-esque property, the florality, herbalness, and citrusy boom bada ding, they're all in there. So yeah, interesting. There is actually a little bit of a story about this one on the website as well, so let me just open that up for you so I can read it. So yeah, it says on the site, on the website, the webpage for this actual beer, it says here, don't call it a comeback, but this beer has quite the backstory. Many years we started brewing a series of double IPAs called Crush. Crush was our ever-changing concept, idea and journey towards the perfect double IPA in a world where our vision of the ideal double IPA was ever-changing. Having brewed the Crush series for a couple of years, in 2018 we started to brew beer in the USA. Mostly hoppy stuff because hoppy stuff doesn't travel well, and we wanted to offer the consumer fresh, hoppy Dugas beers. Deciding on what to brew there was easy. We just lifted the Crush series overseas and started playing around with them there. But the response was overwhelming, so we knew we needed to take the American varieties home, and so we did. Now, Elite is not one of those varieties or part of the Crush series, but it is all that we've learned from dreaming up and brewing double IPAs, and it does follow our latest double IPA Prime. It's also a good continuance for once again aiming at that ever-changing perfect double IPA Supreme. So yeah, Interesting. This one doesn't say anything about the hops or anything that are in this beer, but yeah, I think that's all we need to say about the beer itself. But as we said, half-litre can, plain silver top on it. I think I paid 55 Swedish kronor for this, €5.50, $6 American, maybe about £5 sterling for those of you watching in different places. So yeah, 8% double IPA this one. Let's get it out and we'll get on with the tasting. Curious to see what this is going to give us. Been a wee while actually since I've had a New England double from Dugis Bryggeri, but this does look pretty nice, I have to say. So let me just position that there. So anyway, as you can see with this beer, it's poured pretty much as you would expect from a New England of any description. So I think we have about 60%, maybe, yeah, 2/3 of the beer in the glass just now, but there's a solid half finger of a frothy, I would say, perfect white head on this one. You can see there's some really nice kind of small bubbles there, which looks good. And this one is actually fairly pale in its complexion. There are one or two big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass, a few little ones going up toward the bottom of the head, and the head incidentally is just fading away to be a kind of thinner foamy layer. But yeah, colour-wise, this one's actually a slightly more pale yellow. So remember, the colour of your beer depends on the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. Length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugar's caramelised, thus you get a darker colour beer. Any barrel aging that you do or any adjuncts that you put in will affect that too, but when it comes to New England IPAs, you don't often have to care about those two variables. In terms of the opacity of this beer, this is definitely not one of the soupier and gloopier New England doubles that I've come across actually. When you put the light through this, you can see it's actually not all that opaque. But remember, the haziness in these beers depends on the oak content, wheat content and the yeast. And there's not a rule about, you know, going further up the alcohol scale. You've got more malt, thus more wheat, more oat, and things like that. So, you know, it can vary from brewery to brewery and beer to beer, the level of haziness you get in these. But in terms of what you'd expect from a New England IPA of any description, the appearance of this one really isn't all that surprising. But yeah, not the haziest and soupiest and gloopiest within this style category that I've ever seen. But still, as long as it tastes good, that's the main thing. Don't think we need to say anything else about the appearance of this one. Let's have a look at the aroma. Oh yeah, right. Straight away with this one, I'm going to say this is a very soft. It's a very soft New England IPA for sure. Yeah, actually has a fair little bit of sweetness to it as well, which is kind of interesting, and a good little bit of oatiness. So as I've said to you, there are 6 different directions you can take a New England IPA. You can have the sort of farmhousey, yeasty characteristics, the rye leaning, grainy sort of things, the wheaty bitey notes, the oaty creaminess, the barley malt bread, and also the kind of sweeter sides of things. And you know, most New England IPAs will show you a variety of these different characteristics. But yeah, this one is kind of interesting because the first thing I notice about it is that it does have a good little bit of oatiness to it, but you are getting a little bit of breadiness and also a wee touch of wheatiness there. So it's actually quite balanced. But the first thing that jumped out at me from this beer was the kind of oaty character. So yeah, this is going to be interesting. It's actually got a fair degree of sweetness to it as well. But yeah, let's break this down and describe it a wee bit more in depth. So the backbone of the beer, you absolutely get a little bit of that kind of fresh white bread crust in there. But then on top of that, it has, yeah, on top of that, you've definitely got a little bit more of a, yeah, on top of that, you've definitely got a little bit of a more wheaty, you can, it has got this, you know, you've got the fresh bread crust, there's one or two little Jacob's cream crackery notes in there, maybe even a little slight touch of woodiness, come to think of it. But then, yeah, you can smell the wheat in this beer, and the wheat actually has a little bit of a zip to it, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, bread crust, bit of cracker, a little bit of a kind of barley malt white bread, but then the wheat comes out quite nicely in this one. It actually, I have a feeling that this beer, when we taste it, I think the bread, kind of malty base on this one is going to be quite crisp, to be honest with you. Now, what I will also say is that you do get a little bit of an oaty character out of this one. And the oatiness is interesting because there is a good degree of sweetness to it, but I'm actually getting quite a bit of dryness from the oats in this beer. And as I've always said, oats are a good indicator of how old your New England IPA is. And I will point out in this video that we're not reviewing this beer in its prime freshness. We have to say that. It has been sitting in my fridge for, maybe 2-3 weeks, and then however long in the Systembolaget warehouse before that. Systembolaget are getting better at getting these beers out there fresh. I will say that. This one is kind of that's kind of my issue. But yeah, with this one, you can definitely smell the oats have a little bit of that kind of porridgey note to them. There's a little bit of the dryness in there, but you're also getting a wee bit of sweetness. But basically, the wetter and creamier your oats smell, the younger the beer is, the drier they smell, the older it is. So we'll see how that comes out. But this beer is quite wheaty and quite barley malt leaning, I think, to be honest with you. But there is a slight degree of sweetness to it. I'm getting some Werther's Originals and some kind of butter candy notes out of it too. And there is a wee bit of wheaty bitiness in the back of the nose. So we'll need to see how all of that transpires when we actually taste the thing. But I think, to be honest, that covers the malty side of the beer. But I get quite a bit more woodiness and bread crusty character out of it the further into it that I go. But yeah, it works. It does work. Let's focus on the green component then. For me, the green component is quite interesting. I'm getting a lot of bright floral notes out of it. There is a good degree of grassy zestiness in this as well. But at the same time, it's kind of smooth. So you're getting at the front of the nose and the top of the nose, there's a bit of grassy zestiness in there, but it is quite smooth. A little bit of floral character behind it, and wee hints of earthiness as well. So this beer is definitely one that's kind of striking my interest. I'm just curious to see what this is going to do in the actual flavour. So yeah, the fruity notes on this are interesting as well. I'm getting a little bit of like a soft mango kind of I'm getting a bit of that soft mango, like papaya, apricot sort of thing. I wonder if Idaho 7 is being used in this one, because the tropical fruits are very, very soft. And there's also, I don't get much in the way of orange out of this one, but it has almost got a little bit of a like kind of gooseberry, white green grapey sort of thing. I don't think Nelson Sauvin, it's not, I like to think I would pick Nelson Sauvin up if it was there, but I think this one, it could be a little bit of Hallertau Blanc or something like that. But yeah, for me, it's got a little bit of that more kind of gooseberry, white green grapey sort of note to it, then a lot of soft tropical fruits behind that, apricots, papayas, a softer mango, maybe a wee tiny hint of passion fruit or something like that. But the fruity notes in this are quite interesting. Maybe a bit of pineapple coming out of this too. I think, yeah, Idaho 7, Victoria's Secret, something like that, and maybe a little bit of Hallertau Blanc or Nelson Sauvin or something. I'll say that, but I'll be completely wrong. Playing Guess the Hops is a lot more difficult these days than it used to be back in the day when we started the channel. There's a whole host of different varieties out there these days. Yeah, it could even be Sabro's a bit more distinctive, but you are getting a little bit of that almost kind of coconutty note out of this one, to be honest. Yeah, it's really interesting, the aroma of this beer. So as I always say, take a wee bit of time to just enjoy that aroma before you get stuck in. But I think we should have a taste of this one now and see what we have. So yeah, this is the Elite, an 8% New England. Oh, I've just noticed on the side of the can it tells you the hops. It says Amarillo, Citra, Laurel, Mosaic and Nelson Sauvin. So I got the Nelson Sauvin right. I wouldn't have thought Mosaic and Amarillo. Doesn't smell that orangey. But yeah, Citra and Laurel. Laurel's quite an interesting one, an English. If I remember rightly, Laurel's an English variety, but I could be wrong on that. I never noticed that. I'll need to keep an eye on the Dugas cans going forward. But yeah, interesting I don't get so much orange out of the aroma of that. But, interesting that I picked up the Nelson, the kind of gooseberry notes out of that. So yeah, but this one, 8% New England double IPA, apparently containing Amarillo, Citra, Laurel, Mosaic and Nelson Sauvin. So let's have a taste and see what we've got. Sláinte, skål, cheers. Oh yeah. Once again, that's just a really, really solid beer from Dugas. It's very well rounded. I mean, the first impression I have of this one, it's got a bit of smoothness to the malt base, but there's a little bit of an oily, juicy character to it. And yet the green component actually has a little bit of a zip to it as well. So it's very well rounded. It's just it's almost a dangerously easy drinking New England double IPA, this one. But yeah, it's solid. It's definitely a solid enough one, this. But I noticed that with the Dugas beers. One of the things I always said about Dugas back in the days was that their mouthfeel was very light in the IPAs, but the flavour profile was always good. But they seem to have got a bit more, they've balanced it out a little bit more. It's got a nice smoothness to it and it gives you a thickness, but they are still kind of sessionable and drinkable. But at 8%, this one's almost dangerously drinkable, we have to say. But that's a really nice, juicy, slightly oily, but still quite smooth and creamy New England IPA, actually. Yeah, I like that. I do like how this goes together from Dugas, so thumbs up to them. Do I like it as much as the pinball that we had in the last video? Maybe not quite, but I've always been, I mean, you guys watching the channel know this, I'm a sucker for a kind of big brown sugary malt base, and I like that about the West Coast IPAs, the big hoppy dankness, but then the oily, sweeter malt base. So the New England IPAs, I do enjoy them, but I think I have to admit I am more of a West Coast man, or even a black IPA man than New England's. So yeah, this is for if you enjoy New England, so I think you will enjoy this one. This is just very, very smooth. One of the smoothest New Englands I've had over the last little while, actually. So a thumbs up to Dugas for this one. But I think I have to admit, I think I do like the pinball a bit better than this, but that's personal preference. As we always say, beer is subjective. Yeah, anyway, this beer smoothens out very, very nicely, but let's just break it down and describe it a wee more in depth. So, backbone, middle third of the palate. Yeah, you've got a little bit of that kind of crisp white bread crust in there. Not too grainy, again, really quite smooth. On top of that, I would say the malty character in this one's a good wee bit different from what we were picking up in the aroma at the same time. So you have got this layer of smooth and almost slightly wet. It's like a wet white bread that you get out of this one. And as I say, I do quite like that. So yeah, you've got that lovely, just a little bit of bread crust, the smooth and slightly wet, dense white bread in there, and on top of that, there's a slightly denser, wheaty layer to the beer as well. Above that, you get the oaty notes out of this. I will say that toward the front of that middle third of your palate, there are one or two little, Jacob's cream crackery elements. It has got a little bit of that crackery dryness and a little touch of woodiness as well. So that's definitely interesting. So yeah, toward the front of that middle third of your palate, you get a little bit more of those notes, a bit of cracker, a little bit of woodiness in there. But then, yeah, you can feel that there's a layer of wheat just densifying the beer out. And I will say that on the back third of the tongue, the wheat has a little bit of a different thing, but we'll come to that in a minute. But in the middle third of your palate, you can, down the middle line of your tongue, you can feel the oats there. So right down that middle line of your tongue, you've got this really wet, sort of mashy, porridgey type character to the oats. And as you move further out toward the edges of your palate, you can feel they just get that little bit drier. And as I've always said, with New England IPAs, you can usually tell how fresh they are because the oats are always very, very kind of creamy and smooth if the beer is very young and very fresh. But the older the beer gets, the more dryness you'll get out of the oats. And you can just feel that there's a little bit of dryness coming out of the oaty characters in this beer toward the edge of the palate there. So yeah. One of the other interesting things to point out about this beer too, normally in the dead centre of your palate you'll get a little bit of sweetness, and that's usually the alcohol of the beer. The alcohol always gives you a slightly caramelly, biscuity sort of flavour. But in this beer, it's not that visible at all. or should we say detectable. You know, in the dead centre of your palate, you have got a little touch of a McVitie's digestive biscuity sweetness, but for me, this beer, it still covers its alcohol very well. As I said earlier, it's a dangerously drinkable New England IPA, this one. But yeah, it's definitely not got such a big sweet component to it, which is kind of surprising when you consider that it's an 8%er. So yeah, it's a very very smooth, not smoothie beer, this one. So yeah, bread crust, dense wet white bread, slightly thickening wheaty layer, and you've got the nice oaty notes on top, and just a little touch of biscuit in the middle of the palate, one or two little woody crackery sort of things. I think that summarises the middle third of your palate in this one quite well. Back third of the palate is quite similar in that regard. So the border region between middle third and back third of your palate, a little bit of bready build up. You can feel the bread crust gets a little bit more grainy towards the back. Remember, more bitter, grainy flavours come out further back on the palate. On top of that, you can feel that dense white bready layer is a little bit taller for sure, and on top of that, you are getting some kind of wheaty, bitey characteristics from the wheat in this beer too, and then above that, you're starting to get some of the more yeasty, estery notes out of it. So yeah, above all of that, above the wheaty bitiness, and I will say that the wheaty bitiness lingers into the aftertaste for this beer. We're getting the sun coming out again, so you'll see the change in light levels in this video. But yeah, the wheaty bitiness there, and above that, you're getting some of the more kind of airy, yeasty characteristics out of the beer. So you have that really airy white bread, little touch of that woody, farmhousey kind of dryness in there too. But definitely on the back third of the palate, I think it's the wheaty bitiness that really shines, to be honest with you. So you can see you feel that the flavour is a little bit taller then as you come into the middle third of the palate. It just condenses down a little bit. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting beer, this one for sure. Yeah, hoppy side of things then. Let's look at the green component. So a little bit of earthiness there in the back corners of the palate. So that's going to be coming from the mosaic out of the hops in this beer. And remember, New England IPAs rely on late addition and dry hopping. Late addition hopping gives you a little bit of bitterness, but mainly flavour and aroma, and dry hopping is all flavour and aroma. West Coast IPAs also use early addition hopping, which is responsible for the most of the bitterness. They use all three in West Coasts. They only use late and dry hopping for the most part in New England IPAs, but they can use a little touch of dry hopping, a little touch of early addition hopping, I should say, in New England's as well. But yeah, little touch of earthiness in there. As you move further forward, you start to get, there is actually a little bit of a deep floral note to this one. You can feel that it does, I think there will, just going by the flavour in this one, you can feel there's been a little bit of early addition hop in this because of how deep the green properties of this beer are. But as you reach the kind of front corners of the palate, it has got a little bit of spice to it. Round the front curve of the palate, you've got a little bit more of a kind of oily, grassy sort of thing to this one. So that's quite interesting. But all of the hops in this one are capable of giving you all of these different properties. But yeah, fruity side of the beer with this one is quite interesting. Yeah, let's focus on that front third of the palate then. The border region between front third and middle third of your palate, again, you get a little touch of a bready build up with this one. White bread, and then the base of the front third of the palate is that lovely smooth white bready character as well. And on top of that, you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. At the back of the front third of the palate with this one then, you definitely get a nice little bit of that stronger grapefruity character, which is going to come from the citra in that case. Then you've got a slightly stronger passion fruit coming around there, but then it mellows out as you move toward the front, toward the kind of middle of that front third of your palate, I should say. You get a nice juicy mango, and there are wee elements of apricots and papayas underneath, and a wee touch of pineapple on top. But yeah, in the front third of the palate for me, it's all about the Nelson Sauvin. It's all about that kind of white, grapey, gooseberry sort of thing. I have to be honest with you and say I don't get all that much in terms of orange out of this beer until the aftertaste. And Amarillo is going to give you that big, oily, zesty orange, whereas Mosaic is going to give you a slightly lighter but juicier tangerine. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. This one, it's interesting that I picked up. I really got the Nelson Sauvin out of this. I was thinking it might have been Hallertau Blanc though, because it wasn't quite as oily in the aroma. But yeah, I don't get all that much orange out of this beer. For me, it's mainly the Citra and the Nelson Sauvin that comes out of this one. But yeah, when you take it in fairness, yeah, there's a wee bit of an orangey character sitting on top of the Nelson Sauvin in the front half of the front third of your palate. But then, yeah, I think the further you go into the aftertaste, you get a sort of lull. So you get orange in the beginning from Amarillo and Mosaic. The Nelson Sauvin kind of forms the anchor in the hoppy side of this beer and the fruity side of things. Then, yeah, the orangey zesty notes come out a little bit again. So it's kind of interesting that there isn't that much orange in the beer, but I think, you know, you can notice it at certain points in the flavour. I think that's fair to say. But I think that's all we need to say about the actual the flavour of this beer, to be honest with you. I think we've described it really quite nicely. I think we should finish off and have a look at the mouthfeel then. This one's taken a wee bit of time to go through because it's been a while since I've reviewed a Dugas New England Double. So yeah, in terms of the mouthfeel then, I would say that this one's pushing towards the top end of mid-body. The carbonation is quite smooth. It's got a good degree of wetness, and there's a bit of creaminess in there, but it's a little bit dry and other, you know, other things going on in this beer. So yeah, there's a few interesting components to this, but I think it's quite an interesting beer. This one, it is actually kind of smooth in a lot of ways. I think that's how I would describe it: a smooth New England Double IPA. In terms of IBUs, I think this is a fairly standard 30, despite that kind of bigger floral and earthy presence that the beer has to a degree. Malt base is very, very smooth, no real sweet component to it, and the fruity notes for me are quite well balanced between the tropical side of things and the more oily and slightly citrusy kind of note. It's kind of got a three-pronged attack on the fruity side of things, to be honest with you. But another very, very solid New England Double from Dugas. I think they've done a really good job with this. So yeah, I think we can leave it at that with this one. So this is the Dugas Elite, or this was the Dugas Elite, an 8% New England Double IPA, Amarillo, Citra, Laurel, Mosaic and Nelson Sauvin. Really enjoyable beer, this one, and dangerously drinkable. So yeah, let's leave it at that. Once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Dugas Bryggeri. Check out my social media, check out theirs, check out some of my other Dugas Bryggeri reviews, and try some of the different beers. Till the next time, Slàinte Scill, cheers, and see you guys very, very soon.